building where Vice President Al Gore will address the nation. He will be joined by his wife Tipper, his running mate Senator Joseph Lieberman, and Hadassah Lieberman. We're told the Vice President's speech will run about 10 minutes. He will deliver it from his ceremonial office at the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Our phone lines will be open following his remarks, and Governor Bush will be addressing the country from Austin, Texas in 1 hour.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended. Resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say Bernie won. With super producer Matt Leck.
Bernie won.
Chief economist David Griscom.
Bernie won.
Bernie absolutely won. Folks, he got more votes. Period. And I noticed a lot of people who for the last couple of years were going, well, you know, even though Hillary Clinton colossally screwed up a historical election and managed to lose to some trust fund baby predator game show host, she got 3 million more votes. Let's apply the same logic to this situation. Bernie won the most votes. And also, on this week's program, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, folks, but why is it that every single screw-up that we see coming out of Iowa never favors Bernie Sanders? I haven't seen any anecdote of like, oh, there was just these votes that were going to Klobuchar and then they went to Sanders. So weird. And the lack of release of results, whatever way you want to spin it, focus even on just the raw, awe-inspiring incompetence of the Iowa Democratic Party and the DNC in general. Wonder how this precedent is going to work with Donald Trump and the Republicans, folks.
Just got to do some quality checks.
Just got to do a little bit of quality control.
Quality control.
Just a little quality. Look at quality. Remember Al Gore? Al Gore ritually sacrificed the Supreme Court. Get to that. Plus, Corey Pein, author of Live, Work, 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 Die, Journey to the Savage Heart of Silicon Valley, will be talking about why we need to have a complete and total shutdown on technology until we figure out what the hell is going on. And in all seriousness, that having tech systems override human judgment and accountability is actually antithetical to democracy, in addition to being corporatist and delusional. We got a gem with David Griscom. In the postgame, we're inaugurating a new segment, Matt Leck's Cyberbullies, which we're very excited about.
I think I'm going to go with cyberbullying with Matt.
Cyberbullying with Matt. Nancy Pelosi, man, she really tore that page. She also applauded for Juan Guaido, and of course gave Trump a huge victory on the new NAFTA, which is built on a foundation of lies and is not going to do anything to reverse global ecological collapse. And of course, a debunk with Ben Burgess, the ever odious David Frum, has thoughts about electability. Because as we all know, the great heartland of America is profoundly worried about electing a president that isn't vulgar and wants to kill as many people in Palestine as possible. All that and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show. Let's start with what happened in Iowa, folks. And we began with that Al Gore cold open because it's a good reminder that following the rituals and affirming the justness of the system is oftentimes, frankly, just delusional. There was nothing hidden about that process, right? You had a governor of a state who was the brother of the presidential candidate, a secretary of state who favored that presidential candidate. There was numerous technical irregularities and other biases that favored George W. Bush in the state of Florida. And voting was halted before it could be completed because, I kid you not, the Republican Supreme Court, led by then Chief Justice Rehnquist and along with Scalia and others, wrote in a 5-4 decision that fully counting the votes, which would by definition mean that different counties would have different ways of adjudicating ballots and finishing the voting, would be a violation of George W. Bush's 14th Amendment rights. So in other words, people who've dedicated their entire lives to rolling back civil rights in a substantive way, to depreciate voting rights, to lessen equality for African Americans, which is the mission of the Republican Supreme Court, said George W. Bush's rights are threatened by us actually having a democratic process in Florida. That's what happened. They even wrote in the decision, and by the way, we know we're using the 14th Amendment to override a state court, and that's kind of not our thing. So let's just remind everybody, don't use this again. This is a one-off. Al Gore came out and said, well, I disagree. I submit to being ritually ripped off, and I will go and work on carbon neutral toilets, as well as also being on the board of directors of Apple, where he helped sign off on a report that cleared Steve Jobs for some extremely questionable behavior around stock buybacks. But anyways, being as it may, our society is totally rotted. That's the reason I brought that example up. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton ran an arrogant, delusional, massively incompetent campaign that rode on the assumption that she could ignore key parts of the country, hang out at Bono concerts, vacation in Martha's Vineyard, and glide her way to victory. That didn't work out that way. But people pointed out, and they pointed out, by the way, rightly, in the context of the election of Donald Trump, it was important to remind everybody that the Electoral College is totally undemocratic, totally ridiculous, and that Hillary Clinton won 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. That was important to register. But by the time we got to 2018, these same people who wanted to destroy any project to actually deliver healthcare, solve inequality, deal with the climate crisis, who spent most of their time online either being like, whoa, did you see the way Nancy Pelosi raised her eyebrow at Donald Trump? Or, being on MSNBC saying like, I'll tell you what, here's my thoughts on Bernie Sanders. If the Klan allowed Jewish people, he'd be a leader in it. And that's what concerns me. And then when we responded to it, they would say, oh my God, we're being bullied. All I said was that Bernie would be in the Klan. Why can't people support unity? They used that talking point, even though it was right, to obscure urgent strategic changes that the Democratic Party needed to undertake, and of course to try to undercut the Bernie Sanders movement. But the one positive from that was that it was commonly accepted amongst a lot of people, including people who wouldn't have touched this before generationally. Democrats had not campaigned against the Electoral College even after the monumental screwing of Al Gore in 2000. All of a sudden, it seemed like we had actually reached some form of consensus that the vote winner should be president. Seems pretty obvious. In fact, here is a gentleman who may or may not have been involved in bread price fixing, who may or may not be an asset of the CIA. I know that that profoundly offends people at points when I say it, to which I say, yawn.
He has intelligence on his resume.
He has intelligence on his resume, and I'm also going to say CIA is a state of mind. Here is Pete Buttigieg campaigning a couple of weeks ago, or in April 2019, making, I think, a pretty fair point.
And at risk of sounding simple-minded, I believe that the best way that a nation like ours should select its national leader is to have an election, count up all the votes, and give it to the woman or man who gets the most.
And I agree with Pete Buttigieg, which is why him declaring victory in Iowa, a state where he lost the popular vote, according to these partial, insane results we're seeing. But insofar as we can measure any of these things, and there's still some conjecture going on, because they have not released the totals, but all appearances indicate that Bernie Sanders won more votes than Pete Buttigieg. So I'm going to turn around Pete and say, how dare you go out and declare victory when you had rightly taken the stand that democracy should be determined by a majority, not some convoluted, ridiculous voting process. And in addition to that, I'm sorry, folks, there is absolutely a conversation to be had about incompetence, about double dealing, about an incestuous relationship between the DNC and political consultants. Absolutely. And this isn't some secret Baroque conspiracy. I don't think that there is a secret algorithm to eliminate Bernie votes, because I don't think, frankly, there's Democratic consultants who are competent enough to do something like that. But I would say this. Why is it that every single screw up we're seeing always breaks against Bernie? And in addition to that, look at what's right in front of you. Do you think that if a polling methodology accidentally left Bernie Sanders out of a questionnaire, and the Sanders campaign complained to the CNN Des Moines Register that a poll would be spiked? In your fucking dream of dreams, that would never happen. Ever. Do you think that if Bernie Sanders came out on stage after having, by all accounts, won less votes and with no totals fully presented and just said, we won, that the media would give him a 24-hour victory lap and talk about the possibility of the first Jewish president? In your dreams. So whatever terminology we want to use, okay, and I think we just cannot afford too much pedantry about this stuff. There is institutional bias against Bernie Sanders. Now, does that mean that Bernie Sanders cannot win? Does that mean that the movement cannot overcome it? Of course not. Not for a second. But it does mean that there's profound institutional bias here. And I'm also not going to question people. I don't want you to go fully in a conspiracy rabbit hole, because that is disempowering. If you really have it was written view of the world, you're not going to get anything done. However, if you're not looking around and saying, like, that is weird. Why does this consulting firm have a relationship with Buttigieg? Why does what is going on here? And in a really concrete way, look at the reporting on the LIBOR score that came out several years ago. LIBOR was supposed to be an unimpeachable gold standard of global financial markets. That could never be manipulated. Ooh, no. And when they discovered it, of course, it was manipulated. It wasn't because there was a secret cabal that was controlling it. It was because people knew each other. There was one report of LIBOR price fixing where some guy calls up somebody involved in the score, says, hey, can you help me out with blah, blah, blah? The guy says, okay, how about you take me out for a sushi lunch? I'll help you out. So you have to start filtering it through the fact that Sanders is on the outside of that dynamic. So if there's favors to be called in, if there's jump balls to be played, if there's splits, if there's decisions to be made like that, they're going to go against him. Just as an example, as I said before, we all know that there's no way in hell that the Des Moines Register or CNN would spike a poll because the Bernie Sanders campaign is complaining. Now, by all accounts, Sanders had a successful night there, and he heads into New Hampshire with extraordinary momentum. He was attacked across the board with lies, despicable smears. There was a shadowy group promoting vicious lies against Bernie Sanders about Israel that enlisted some premium or very old Democratic talent. People are right to have doubts about the process. We don't want to enter conspiratorial territory, but the fact that the Democratic establishment hired a group of people incapable of developing this platform should alone be bad enough. Tom Perez needs to resign now. Over the years, there's been a total erosion of the party's power and local and state institutions. And today, with a clown fascist Donald Trump in power, the Democratic Party has been content with symbolic gestures like ripping up his speech while passing horrific military budgets, a space force, a new NAFTA, a renewed Patriot Act, and funding for the border wall, ICE, and detention facilities. Bernie Sanders and our movement have momentum. Against us, we have billionaire class, a party establishment that's fine with keeping the status quo so long as they maintain their elite position and contracts. And their incompetence and failure in Iowa shows that since they control the party in the primary system, they have enough power that whether by intention or simply utter incompetence, they can harm and undermine not only the Sanders campaign, but the legitimacy of the entire process. We need to be vigilant, we need to be committed, and we need to continue to grow and expand the movement we've been building over years that has brought us to the position today, because our opponents cannot be trusted to deliver us victory against the far right. Bernie won. Keep fighting. Feel optimistic. And there is no room. People get triggered by this. I'll try to put this in a diplomatic way as possible. If you have any inkling of this, whether you're more of like a centrist liberal type who's identified with Warren, but you really want some of these changes, whether you've identified with Gabbard or Yang, there is a coalescing now of one candidate who has a shot of actually taking on this party establishment and the establishment in general. And if that's what you're interested in doing, it's Bernie Sanders. You guys have anything you want to add?
I just want to make the comparison, whether or not the thing is the incompetence versus malice sort of thing is, I think that definitely capitalism doesn't select for talent, and there's not a meritocracy, and people at the top of the Democratic Party making these decisions aren't that competent.
No.
But I also think that, like, to think about this in disaster capitalism terms, this is like sort of disaster authoritarianism, and authoritarianism, as we know, comes from the center. And so whether or not like the chaos that happened originally was intentional, they're in control of the chaos. So they're in control of dolloping out results that they have. Like, they get to control what gets leaked to the press about things. They get to control spin. Like, I'm looking at this article. This was before, like, this is at 2:44, so way before the actual caucuses. And like what the party's saying here is, like, the Iowa Democratic Party said it is aware of the problems, but stressed it would not affect the reporting of the results. Like, just bullshitting, right? Like, right. And I think the thing to point out is the pattern that it keeps effing Bernie. And of course there's a selection bias here, right? Because we probably, like, some guy called in and said he was able to steal a delegate as a Bernie supporter for the, he called him the majority report coverage. So like this coin flips and like the small ball stuff, I'm sure
definitely.
Like occasionally
some of those will break for Bernie, of
but
course.
At the same time, this is the stuff where the actual people controlling the levers of this party, I mean, yeah.
Do you doubt for a second? Look, I'll say this, this is me. I say what I think on every platform, but I'll present it, in different ways on different platforms. Always what I think, but with different presentations. So the rawest thing I could say here is, do you really think for a second, if there was information that they could glean that Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden or frankly Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar had won this caucus, that we would be in this process? No. Sorry. I mean, I think it's very likely, clearly, that Pete Buttigieg's strategy of dumping an obscene amount of money here led him to overperform. I also think spiking that poll led him to overperform. But there is no doubt in my mind that if these numbers did not show that at the end of the day, more human beings went into the Iowa caucuses and caucused for Bernie Sanders, that we would have all of this information. Period. Full stop.
I think that's exactly the point that we need to be making about, these vote totals and like the slow rollout. There's obviously is, an intention to try to stifle any enthusiasm or momentum that there is for Bernie Sanders. I just wanted to add to Matt's point too, is like, you look at this organization that made this app, and it really does show the fundamental problem with the Democratic Party. So you have what is a democratic process, right? Which is people going to the caucusing and voting, and there's problems we have with caucuses, whatever, right? But this is like a democratic activity. And the Democratic Party now is saying, well, what's a way that we can have our friends profit from it? And it's a serious problem within, DC, is that you have all of these like progressive grassroots organizations who profit immensely from the coffers of the Democratic Party for trying to, come up with new ways to innovate the system. I'm not against, changing and making things more efficient or whatever, but for the most part, these are very bloated contracts. And as we saw, in Iowa, they don't always deliver. Often they don't. And they're not hiring the best people. They're hiring their friends. They're hiring. I mean, from what I've seen from the reports on Shadow, most of the people working on this platform didn't even have any like coding or app development experience in the first place.
And this is an area where, look, maybe I'm open to somebody who actually knows something to tell me something, maybe, but I'm dubious. These are, they're problems in search. They're solutions in search of a problem. There's nothing. We don't need this app. As evidenced by the fact, by the way, that all other Iowa caucuses have gone better than this. Yeah. Like, we don't need all of this nonsense.
Well, let me just continue reading this quote from Mandy McClure, the party spokeswoman. The IDP is working with any precinct chairs who want to use the optional tabulation applications to make sure they are comfortable with it. Like, portraying it as if it was just some optional thing. I don't know. It's so infuriating.
It's infuriating. It's disgusting. It's ridiculous. And that's a big problem, too. Look, there's whole infrastructure. I mean, we've seen this with some groups and how they chose to endorse in ways that are totally antithetical to their professed policy set. And my strong suspicion would be that has a relationship with how contracts are going to get doled out and things like this. And this is another thing to underline about the Sanders campaign. Yes, if we want to be pedants about it, it's not literally revolutionary. The policy set is not particularly radical. But the bottom line is that it does threaten capital, and it does threaten a lot of people, including people who'd like to be branded as having fairly progressive profile. It threatens an ecosystem they're in. And it's an ecosystem that works for them, but it doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for us. All right. And that's, and I think that, what really also enrages me, don't go out and be a pure conspiracy theorist and not participate. That's exactly what they want. But they also want people to be acting like mini Al Gores on Twitter. Like, it's totally okay. And I wish I was more competent, but I would just like to say that, honest mistakes. And before we even get to New Hampshire, I commit to voting for Michael Bloomberg in the general election, even though there's Bloomberg consultants who serve on the DNC Rules Committee. That's another thing. Like, there are people who can. Okay, the DNC Rules Committee has Barney Frank, who sits on a bank board and hates Bernie Sanders personally. There are consultants who are getting paid by Mike Bloomberg while they sit on this committee. I mean, at a certain point, you just have to look at observable reality in front of your face and question the institutional biases and get real about it. I mean, you don't think that on a concrete level, whose phone calls get returned? How do things actually work? And you need to go out and demand of every single candidate, will you support the delegate lead candidate? Period. That's the question. I don't care what the technical rules are. I don't give a fuck. Bernie Sanders has 30% of the delegates, and Michael Bloomberg goes, all of a sudden I bought everybody mansions and they gave me this. And then people will say, oh, well, it was technically legal because 50% threshold. No. Yeah. No, we're not doing that. I don't care what's technical.
The closer this looks, the more your ability to be in Milwaukee for that convention, the more important it's going to be, whether it's in the streets or, I mean, whatever you
Absolutely.
can do.
Whatever way
there.
you can participate.
Because they're not going to just allow Bernie, like, they're going to try to fuck him.
They're going to try to fuck him. And this is another thing with, look, hope springs eternal. I want to say, I don't want to I mean, I probably already have, but look, there's some people who support Warren as an example, good faith, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't have any personal animosity, but I hope people can finally see that candidacy is not helping get this done. And the fantasy that they're going to team up, I hope the smear from a couple of weeks ago has disabused people of that. And the focus here should not be on all these, like, people create all these weird mental gymnastic. We want both of these people in, and then we're going to, you know, and then what's going to happen is Bernie's going to win here, and then she's going to win there, and then they're going to make a call, and then it's going to be like a scene in a movie. Like, no, this is a uphill struggle against the oligarchy of this country. There's one candidate that challenges it structurally, and if you want to overcome that bias, you need that person to win and win decisively, because they will pull a lot of tricks in the book to make that not happen.
They threw Debs in prison.
They threw Eugene Debs in prison.
Just historically.
Yeah, I mean, just be aware. Like, and this is not some, like, this isn't the West Wing. This isn't Harry Potter. This isn't like, I mean, the amount of energy. I had so much. It's one of the reasons I'm trying to be sincere here about Elizabeth Warren supporters. I mean, I could deal with. I totally disagreed, but people just said, well, I don't like Bernie, and I like the blog posts, and that's who I want. Cool, let's have it out. Let's see who convinces more people. That's a campaign. But people who are like, oh, I can't. Well, I mean, obviously, well, and of course, it only went one way. You should never criticize her. Of course, he can be criticized and lied about, and defamed constantly, but it was just a fantasy world. If they were together, then they wouldn't be running against each other.
Exactly.
Like what? It's like I don't know what people's like. Keep it simple. They're running against each other. There's a deal. That deal happens later. And by the way, that deal could happen with anybody. Okay. Oh my God! Just it's very serious, and we can't have any naivete about this.
And it's just like, you know, we are in this very historic moment where we are literally seeing the environment of the planet crumble. We are seeing people unable to afford health care. We're seeing people, you know, living in the with stagnant
Oh,
wages.
You're saying that Elizabeth Warren wants the planet to crumble? You know, why don't you spend more time criticizing Joe Biden?
Well, then, you know, the point is that the differences matter. And
the
if Bernie
differences
Sanders
matter.
is pushing a Green New Deal that's radical and Elizabeth Warren is sort of tacitly behind it, then there's a difference, because we are going up against a right-wing Republican army that is determined to do nothing about this. And we think that just kind of tacit support for these things, oh, I believe global warming is real, like that's good enough? No, like you need a plan to deal with this. You need a movement to do it and to put it in place as well. And they've completely refused to engage on that level of, you know, the debate. And now this kind of argument that they're same and that we don't need to do politics in this moment where the only solution to it is like mass democratic strategy and movements of like mass amounts of people is ridiculous. And it shows that the Democratic Party, for the most part, is completely out of any kind of imagination for how to deal with this crisis. The Democratic Party, fundamentally, they just run as the opposite to the Republican Party. They're saying like, hey, the Republican Party is a mess. We're not that. That's not good enough. We also need to be saying we're doing something else, and we're going to change the direction of this country dramatically.
Well, I mean,
I'm scoffing
you
at
say
this
that,
article
David.
you just pulled up, not what David was saying. Sorry.
Yeah, David says this, but has he read the
Yeah,
new
David
Joan?
says this, but has he read Joan Walsh's Fantasy Life?
I haven't been
Elizabeth
reading
Warren
The
has a
Nation.
movement. You just don't see it yet.
Oh, wow. Well, when do we get to see this?
Was it the silent majority?
Yeah. Do we get to see this at the
silent movement?
Do we get to see this at the protest after Trump is reelected? Do we get to see this at the second Women's March, the day after this motherfucker gets a second term sworn in? What is wrong with people?
Elizabeth Warren has an invisible Supreme Court justice.
Oh my God.
This
And
is
the
right.
people, and you know, and the last thing I'll say it too is that the people who really, you know, if you leaned into this unity rhetoric, then I don't want to hear a bad word about anybody. You should be, well, gee golly, Joe Biden has experience, and oh boy, golly ho, Bernie Sanders got plans, and ooh, gee, look at Elizabeth Warren with the plans, and Bernie with the energy. You know, nothing but positives for everybody. Nothing but positives for everybody. I don't agree with that position because the crisis is so deep, and we need to deal with it because it's not just Trump, it's Trump and Trump-like things globally. But if you simply have on your agenda remove Donald Trump, you should not have a bad word to say about any of these people running for president. Full stop. Full stop. You should have talking points prepared for every single Democratic candidate that puts them in the best light as possible. And I mean everyone. I mean Amy Klobuchar. I mean Tulsi Gabbard. I mean Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg. If that's your view, it should be all positive all the time. It should be the O network of political coverage. Okay? If that's not your view, and that is pretty much no one's view, then shut the fuck up and have the argument. Stop being passive aggressive and stop trying to emotionally manipulate people. And I'm not going to do the whole, I'll say real quick, I'm not going to do the whole, like, look, I will always advocate that people vote in such a way that will prevent a Donald Trump second term. But I am genuinely unconvinced at this point of how much energy could be put, even just ethically, into a Mike Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg nonsense general election campaign. One, they'll lose. People are totally unserious about where we're at. And two, they are not going to change any of the parameters of where we're at. That's reality. And if you don't start to see that we better start changing these parameters because the clock is ticking, you are in a different type of delusion, but you're as delusional as these Trump MAGA idiots.
And from our perspective, or from the Chapos, there's a credibility trade-off, right?
Right.
Like, the whole reason people value what the fuck we say is because we don't shift and all of a sudden start pitching Mike Bloomberg to people.
And I did it. I mean, look, I didn't pitch. Go back to the
Well, you just go negative
on
Trump.
Yeah, I just go negative on Trump. I didn't pitch Hillary Clinton. I might have found a few,
That's the thing.
But it was like, okay, look, it was like Adolf Reed. He said, you got to vote for the lying warmonger. It's important. That was my view.
Look, if the Democratic Party wants to put Mike Bloomberg on top of the ticket, and he beats Trump, fine. But selecting him to do that should already have implicit in it that you don't need any help from people like us.
Precisely. There you go.
Yeah, they've decided.
Go take care of business.
They put us on the sidelines.
Yeah, go take care of business.
And the fact
I'm drinking Gatorade.
is that we're the people with momentum, like we're the movement that has momentum. And even if it's not enough momentum to get over one of the most a process that is just so it's ridiculous when you think about the kind of stuff that Bernie Sanders has to go through. I mean, even this is a small thing, but even on ABC, when I was watching the coverage on Iowa, their anchor was like, well, now we're going to turn to the Bernie bros. And they went to Bernie Sanders, campaign party. And you just sit there and say, God, this is so slanderous what they're pushing right now. And it's subtle in the way that they do it, but it just shows how much the deck is stacked against us. And, we're doing this and we're pushing back against this system. And to just think that after that, we're all, we just have to sit down and shut up. It's ridiculous.
Speaking of Bernie bros, we know that in Iowa, to the extent it's been measured, the people of color voting in the Iowa caucuses cleaned up for Bernie Sanders. And that's another thing too, that the very last thing I'll say, I am beyond sick of this talking point. Bernie has by far the most multiracial coalition of any candidate. And you know what? To the extent that there's splits inside that, it reflects other class dynamics. And if you don't see that different groups have dynamism and distinctions within themselves, then you're an essentialist, you're an idiot, and you're probably using it in an extremely cynical way to silence tons of people's voices. Shuja Haider, data showing Sanders won Muslims, Hispanics, and African Americans in Iowa, and somehow we're only going to hear about white podcasters or whatever. I mean, there it is. There it is. And I mean, even me, I will probably not be maintaining this, but I've tried to make some differences. I really don't believe in demonizing average voters. So I think you can critique, like, of course, there's a coalition of Pete and Warren that I have a problem with. I don't think affluent professional class liberals should be dominating Democratic Party politics. I don't think that's healthy. But do I not see, the woman in her 60s that I talked to who really wants the historical nature of a woman president? Of course I see that. Do I want people who even, Buttigieg, who literally has nothing to recommend him from my viewpoint, understand, wow, a gay man is here? Like, I see that. And these people spend their whole day not only erasing, of course, it goes without saying that we'll engage in a massive exercises of racism and sexism to erase the Sanders coalition, but frankly, the other part of it is fucking lame too. Like, yeah, there's some white podcasters that support Bernie Sanders. Good. It's awesome that there's media professionals who make a living pontificating, who actually advocate an agenda that has solidarity with Brazil and Iran and wants to give people health care. What the fuck are you doing? Well, I see a lot of white media professionals who are outside every single day fighting to deprive people of health insurance for their own personal neurosis and career advances. Let's talk about those podcasters and media analysts. I know a white guy on MSNBC who is undermining an entire Democratic movement because of an imaginary friends he had in the 1970s, and that's political analysis. And if Bernie bros exist, awesome. That's great. Good. There's bros who want people to have health care. Awesome. Thank you, Bernie bros. Thanks. The fuck is wrong with people?
I was going to say too. It's like probably one of like the most like typically like violent, dangerous groups of people, which is like young men. If like all these young men were just walking around trying to sign people up for Medicare for all, being anti-war, like
hey bro, is there any way you could help us out? We're trying to prevent war with Iran. Whoa, it's horrible. Oh my God, it's so male.
Yeah, using toxic masculinity to stop war with Iran.
Someone tweeted, they asked Joy Reid what the credentials of her body language expert were and asked if she could stop doing anti-Semitic dog whistles against Bernie. Whoa, the bro. It's all passive-aggressive, disingenuous, dishonest, sociopathic bullshit. And I'm not indulging any of it. All right. Let's get to the shout out, the pitch, and then we'll finally get to the great Corey Pein, Corey, if you're watching. Corey, if you're watching, sorry we're late. Shout out, shout out, shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out, shout out, shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out, shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Shout out, shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas. The dial of ideas. I like talking about ideas. High level. The exchange of ideas.
Shout out.
High level. Still in recovery mode.
Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
A federal judge. So this is one of the most evil things and a great example of the just absolutely deteriorated state of the United States. There are humanitarian groups in the border who are trying to basically leave water and provisions for people crossing the border so they don't die of dehydration. They were criminally charged for doing this in one of the most, along with, I mean, look, we know that the immigration policy is the rawest expression of barbarism, of white nationalism, of pure human cruelty, which is, I think, training us to accept greater and greater levels of simply obscenity and inhumanity from the Trump administration, from the Republican Party. And a federal judge has thrown out no more deaths convictions. David, can you take it from here? This is important.
Yeah, this is a group of, activists and volunteers who have been going around making sure that, human beings who are making this incredible journey across one of the hottest deserts in the world aren't dying of starvation and dehydration because these people are being forced out of their homes because of the economic conditions and the reality that the United States is, you know, the economic hub of the region and has the highest paying jobs. So people are crossing over, you know, to provide for their families. And, you know, these people aren't even really taking, you know, the political stand on anything else other than, like, as human beings, we just cannot see people suffer in this way. And it's absolutely cruel. So they've been, you know, providing water and food for a long time. And in Arizona, they started criminalizing that activity, and these people were arrested for putting water out, and then, you know, faced criminal charges. And yeah, so they won their case. The federal judge, you know, blocked the criminal charges against it. Potentially they could face state charges, but then that could again go to the federal courts. Two, I just wanted to add as a kind of editorial note, you know, this was won as a case of religious freedom, which, don't get me wrong, if you're, you know, a lawyer trying to get people off of criminal charges for something as humane as this, you know, that is, you got to use what you got to do. But it just shows you sometimes how ridiculous our justice system is, that we can't even see as human beings that we shouldn't criminalize giving people water or food who are hungry and thirsty. And it really shows the depravity of our system and the system that we're trying to change.
Absolutely. So that's the shout out. I should have mentioned, we're going to get to Corey in a minute. I should have mentioned, so Emma Vigeland will be back on here in a couple of weeks. She had to go last minute. She's covering a protest, I think, about the Iowa caucuses. There's so much going on. Anyways, she'll be here. She'll be back. But I should let people know that up top. All right, guys, very important. You got to become a patron. This is always the time of year where there's a bit of a fall off. And there's definitely been a little decline the last couple of weeks. Nothing, again, I won't lie, nothing dramatic, but it's important that if you're sitting and waiting, that you come in and fill the gap. Because, I mean, basically, and obviously the point is to grow and to grow. We want to hit by the election a baseline of about 6,000 patrons. It's always sustain and expand. The next phase of what we have to do and expand is obviously continuing to spread out more salary and money. That's first and foremost. But then there's also other steps we need to do to really basically, you know, formalize our own space, literally and figuratively. And also other projects like getting books out. So it's a huge undertaking. It's really, I mean, I absolutely don't get enough sleep. I work on this constantly, like literally constantly. And obviously everybody else in the crew puts a ton of energy into this too. And the awesome things at the base of how we do it is by you becoming a patron. So I'll just leave it at that for now, but it's very important. Make sure there's always problems with people's cards and other things, so double check that. I know sometimes there's weird Patreon declines, but make sure you're set and good to go. And if it's financial, instead of quitting, if you've already been a patron, contact us. We'll give you a deal, 100%. Both because we want to help people out first and foremost, and you know, you can still have something. Just pitch it to us. We'll help you out. We appreciate it. Consider this to obviously be a community. April 3rd, North Door in Austin, Texas. That's going to be an amazing live show with Anna Kasperi and Abby Martin. And I will say, the tickets, they're at the, this might be, we're starting to sell shows out, and I think this is the highest rate that we've ever opened with. So I'd go get those sooner or later if you're sitting and waiting. We have, I'm not sure what the Bell House is right now, to be honest, but go check and see. That's going to be really fun. Alona Minkowski, Brandon Sutton, Harvey K, Ben Burgess, Matt Binder. It's going to be a great show. Maybe even a surprise appearance. So guys, go do it. Patreon.com/TMBS. Very important. That's how you sustain all of this. And I think it's increasingly clear that this whole broader, you know, I was talking with Adolph Reed about this the other day. On one hand, obviously, this needs to transition in and link with the labor movement and other forms of serious mass organization. And supporting the Sanders campaign is obviously profoundly important. And like an actual left voice in media it's actually crucially important. And particularly I think with TMBS, the anti-essentialist work, the historical work, the range, and the dynamic I think we're striking between approachability and accessibility. People tell their friends, they tell their community about it, and people like it and pick up on it. And then on the other hand, really, especially when you're a patron, getting into like a lot of depth and having a range of really going into different areas of theory and history, and just this incredible team of people that we've been able to assemble around us. Patreon.com/TMBS, TMBS.fm. We just shipped out. People are getting their gear, and we're getting really, really positive reviews about that. That's also really fun. And we will be also selling merch at our live shows as well. All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break. Be right back with Corey Pein. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Folks, in addition to abolishing almost all Democratic technology firms in the country and having Tom Perez resign immediately, we also all know that we need to have a complete and total shutdown of technology until we figure out what the hell is going on. And here to explain why we need to do that is our friend Corey Pein, who's host of the News from Nowhere podcast. Great podcast. Get to it on Patreon. He's also the author of Live, Work, 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 Die, A Journey into the Savage Heart of Silicon Valley. Corey Pein, welcome back to TMBS.
It's good to be back, Michael. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure.
I also am one of the two writers for AM Quickie now.
Oh, that's right.
I got hired by Sam, and then immediately started having accidents, breaking bones.
So I should say, for people who aren't aware, there's a thing called the AM Quickie, which launched. It's a daily news roundup and brief. You can go subscribe to it on iTunes. And Corey is writing for it, which is awesome. I think is going to undoubtedly take it to the next level. And in addition to that, Corey, because he's been dealing with Sam, is now having a variety of mishaps.
Yeah, what can I say? Yeah, I fell down the side of a mountain trying to snowboard and broke my leg.
Oh.
And Jesus, and I'm resident in Canada, right?
Right.
Which is really good. This is why I think it's really important that Bernie Sanders becomes president, so that I can one day move back to the United States.
So I think that is both true, and also the way you're talking about the Canadian healthcare system reminds me of the guy in Office Space who's thrilled that he's like a quadriplegic because he can quit his job. That's how you're talking about Canadian and U.S. healthcare right now.
Well, I think I got out of the experience with maybe $70 U.S. in costs so far, most of which are going to get reimbursed because my wife has a job with employer insurance. So that's what happens in Canada when you have an accident.
What bone did you break?
And it's a nice experience. Nobody's like badgering you at the ER for like your insurance or whether you have a job or, sign these forms. There's no law. Like, they talk about the weight. I mean, none of that is true. It's all lies. It's all total lies. And I'm the kind of person that has like panic attacks going to a doctor in the States, just it's not something that's in my experience. And it's like something happens when you're in a country with a functioning healthcare system and people treating you nice and, not like a sack of money, waiting to be, jabbed with a siphon. Yeah. And it just makes you treat the world a little bit differently. Like it makes you reconsider people's motives and like whether we can function as a society. It's a big thing. So, it's not what you called me on to talk about, but no, I just thought I'd share. It's what the stakes are.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo this. Hey, Corey, it's Matt. I've said this story before a few months or so ago, but
always bears repeating.
Yeah, my girlfriend had to spend a night in a hospital in France because she had food poisoning. I think basically what it was. But she just, we had to go in, and first we went to this American hospital for like expats, and they're like, actually, you're probably not going to want to stay here because it's going to be a bill of like $700-800 for an overnight stay. So we took an Uber to the French hospital nearby, and stayed for like 13-14 hours overnight, run a whole bunch of tests, got IV drip and everything like that. And then when we were ready to get out of there, they just had us sign something and then said, get out of here. There was no money. Like, it felt like walking out of a department store with a bunch of like goods underneath your arm, and they're just like, no, you can actually just take those. You're fine.
And it's so warped
and isn't it
that we would
interesting
even
to think
make
about how that
comparison.
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying it's true, but it's so insane. Like, we've been so warped by the discourse and the barbarism of healthcare that we it's like you can go and like get your life saved, and it's like stealing from a department store.
Well, maybe eventually we'll be healthy enough as a society, and the left will have enough representation in our politics to where we can talk about why it's actually good to steal from department stores.
That's the next phase.
That's 2024.
Yeah, that's right. That's why the Bernie State of the Union, and that's why I'm announcing a new initiative to encourage people to steal from Nordstrom's and Bloomingdale's.
Then 1 mile, there's 25 homeless people without coats, and there's 90 coats in there. You do the math.
And even as we have, he's like reading off his accomplishments. He's just like, and even though Jeff Bezos is in Guantanamo, American life expectancy has increased. There were still multiple coats that are not on homeless people, which is tonight. We are announcing an initiative to engage in a mass redistribution program from all upscale department stores in the country.
I'm glad you brought up Jeff Bezos. I'm glad because this is going to get us on topic. Jeff Bezos, I don't know if people caught the news, got his phone hacked by Saudi Arabia. The founder and chairman of Amazon, the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, tech guy, got his phone hacked, got his nudes stolen, presumably, whatever. They just took everything. In fact, the U.S. government, the National Security Agency, put out guidance late last month, talking about cloud vulnerabilities and asking people to account for hostile administrators. So they're concerned, it sounds to me, like, the cloud contractor they use, that being Amazon, could be compromised at the very top because of this hack. So why on earth would the Democratic Party, with all of this fuss about cybersecurity and the fact that, the agencies of the U.S. government with unlimited resources can't keep themselves secure, why would we put the vote on these machines? I mean,
well, I actually want to ask you that, because I said, you heard me in the beginning. I'm not opposed to, we're going to need to come up with a smart discourse that isn't, purely conspiratorial, but also I think, frankly, isn't just purely like, oh, stuff happens. But I do want to go on this question of rationality and outsourcing. I was actually listening to a conversation the other day with Jerry Brown, of all people, to his credit, he was highlighting as a guy, I forget what the organization is, but he is, I think, Union of Concerned Scientists. And he was saying, I think he's the chairman of it now, or a similar group on proliferation. And he was actually making the point that in the history of possible nuclear conflict, and I know I have trouble with that word, deal with it, that, not you, Corey, the pedants out there,
I understand.
That the reason that and I know you know this history, and maybe you can get into it a bit more, but there have been multiple false alarms. And we're not talking like, we're not talking about Cuban Missile Crisis, like the world is at the brink and diplomacy saves us and back channels. We're talking like a guy sitting at a computer terminal in Russia or Colorado, and they see something that looks like a strike. And instead of doing automatic protocol, they actually go, that seems weird. Maybe I ought to do some double checking before we initiate the end of human life systems. Now, in the arms today, Jerry Brown was saying, that is not possible because these are computerized. There is an automatic response in arms, at least to some degree, right? We had the false alarm in Hawaii in the context of the major escalation rhetorically around North Korea before, Trump decided that he was bonded to that kid. And yes, you also have Iowa. So, and Jeff Bezos, like, just focus on the just competence and delusion of technology component of this.
Well, the solution to all these problems that they're created by the computers is to not use networked computers to solve the problem, right? Like, yep. And you've got a bunch of people selling a solution to a problem that they've created. I mean, this company, Acronym, which is actually a nonprofit that invested in the company that made the app that screwed up Iowa, Shadow, a name that conveys, utter transparency.
And that one's for-profit, right?
That's the for-profit one.
Yes. So you already have this unusual situation, which much of the reporting is now sort of honing in on of, it's not unheard of for a nonprofit corporation to control for-profit companies, but it does raise some flags that, auditors would be looking at. Somebody who wants to look at whether this whole arrangement is above board would be looking at. But on a much more fundamental level, yes, you're talking about a company that, if it can fix this problem, as I saw someone who's smart on tech finance stuff point out, if Shadow, which created the problem, can fix it, then they'll never hurt for government contract work for the rest of the time that anybody that's involved with it is alive, because they've then created the fix. So created the problem and then sold the fix. It is a time-honored tactic of the tech industry. And, I'm honestly surprised to hear Jerry Brown expressing that amount of skepticism about technological solution. I mean, Jerry Brown is almost the prototype of the new wave neoliberal corporate Democrat. A lot of them came out of the Obama administration. David Plouffe, for instance, who left to go work for Uber, was also involved in this company Acronym. Anyway, Jerry Brown was once in the running to take over Steve Jobs' role as CEO of Apple when Jobs was forced out of that company.
Back in the 80s. I mean,
back in the day.
I think the paradox with Jerry Brown is that he's certainly, as far as actual policies go, is certainly right-leaning neoliberal in most certainly fiscal areas. Though he's got a populist streak which comes out sometimes. But I will say, he's the only modern politician who has expressed he has a problem with standardized testing. And he critiques that, and he's got a problem with these automatic systems. And I guess that's something I want to get to that I think is really important, because I noticed in the popular discourse, and even when people like you and I frankly level these critiques, there's one group, there's these two very dumb responses. I'm sorry to say. That's the only word. I wish I could convey it more politely, or I don't know, knee-jerk, cliche, not thought out. And one is, okay, so you're just a Luddite. And then the opposite side of the same coin is, how could you say that? You are on YouTube, and you have podcasts, and you have phones and all this stuff. And of course, those are great. There's some real benefits to technology. No one is denying that. And secondly, just because we see the need for limits on the outsourcing of human capacity to technology and the obvious problems with it does not mean that all of a sudden we're just saying yeah, that's right. Just, rip up the computer terminals, throw away your iPhones. That's ludicrous. That's not what's being discussed. But those narratives are so prevalent. And anytime ideologically determined cliches like that become dominant, I always really want to know what's the market interest behind those narratives?
That's exactly why those narratives became dominant. I mean, I think you're seeing a lot more skepticism now about those kind of arguments than you were, say, 5 years ago. But they're industry narratives. Most of the journalism until a couple of years ago about the tech industry was produced by publications that were essentially advertising vehicles for the industry. They were not going to apply critical perspective to it, or even really a scientific perspective. I mean, this idea that there are tasks to which the application of technology, and specifically software, is going to improve the process is unscientific on its face. You haven't seen, for instance, a whole lot of computer security experts praising this company that was involved in the Iowa debacle, because anybody that is telling you that you need an app to count votes to do something that can be done with pencil and paper, and has reliably been done with pencil and paper for decades, if not centuries, is trying to sell you something. Because adding from a basic security perspective, adding complexity to the process just creates more opportunities for it to fail. And, the latest thing on that specific story today, ProPublica came out with a really kind of must-read piece about all the security problems with this app. This is something that you would expect people who are really upset about Russian hackers, for instance, in the 2016 election, to get very exercised about. And I haven't seen so much of that, presumably because, as you were discussing in your intro, the mistakes broke a certain way that, in this case, was favorable to some of the candidates those people might favor. So there you have my take on that. As to the bigger questions you brought up about techno-fetishism, yeah, these were industry narratives. I mean, people should, the criticism that it's Luddism, this critique is just simply being a Luddite. I mean, I hope people recognize the origins of that phrase and who Ned Ludd was. And stuff like that. I mean, is that a useful 10-second recap?
Please, yes, it is. It is.
Yeah. So I believe he was English. I could be getting some very basic information wrong because I couldn't tell you. I just know 19th century, right? But we're talking about Industrial Revolution period and the introduction of machines, essentially to make production more efficient and cheaper for factory owners by laying people off, which is, really how technology is developed and the priorities under which it's developed under capitalism. So Ned Ludd was a union guy, basically, who said, screw these machines. These people aren't going to throw us out on the street and our families. We're not going to starve because of these machines. So they sabotaged them. And hence you had the Luddite movement. So there's a positive way to look at Luddism as well. I mean, it's as an assertion of, labor rights, which are human rights, really, over the interests of capital, when it uses technology to, lower living standards for the working class.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, that's such an important distinction because I don't even want to get, there is a whole other line of people that we can get into, and I think there actually is some thinking that we should retrieve from people like Ivan Illich and E.F. Schumacher, who, it's not my politics. I mean, I have a more Marxist politics, obviously, but there was a really smart critique coming particularly out of the 70s about technological complexity and the function it played in society and the ideas and the notion that basically a lot of institutions were replicating problems that they were designed to solve. And that's obviously persisted. I mean, that is a feature, not a bug, right? And so, but even that being said, that's a slightly different line. The Luddite line, as you say, is not, this guy wasn't like, oh, I want to live in the cottage in the woods and I'm tired. I don't want the big new machines, He was a laborer who was saying, these machines are going to get implemented to destroy our bargaining power, which is exactly how you would understand these things in a Marxist sense, right? And then the conversation flips, which is, of course, we want technological innovation. We want the capacity to improve our lives, the role it will play in cleaning up the environment and dealing with the ecological crisis. But that ultimately, whether it is your phone or whether it's something more ambitious, that these things will always pose massive societal problems, from cybersecurity to the next wave of brutal labor conditions, to simply dissolving your personal space and monopolizing your attention, unless it is brought out of a capitalist framework. That's definitional, because technology is second order. It's not first order.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. I mean, these tools, we need to control these tools, not the other way around. And that's part of the problem also with this app. I mean, I still haven't seen a story that explains how the contracts were awarded in this process, and that's something I'd like to know. In my mind, there's still fundamentally a corruption story, and I want to get into that in a minute. But you don't even have to accept that whole Marxist critique of, technological determinism in order to see the problems with putting your democracy on an app, right? I mean, first of all, think about this caucus situation. I mean, why don't they use an app for the coin tosses? I mean, we're talking about a somewhat chaotic sort of personal process anyway. And the basic task, the only thing that needs to happen is somebody at point A, the precinct, needs to get the results over to headquarters, right? So a phone call would suffice, you would think, right? So it's got to go through this app. Now, my understanding is hundreds of questions about how to work this thing were coming in to the state party officials, before any caucuses actually happened. So what kind of training was provided for this, right? And who were the users? I mean, if you're developing a piece of software, that's the first question, right? Who's going to use this and for what? And were the people that running these caucuses, I mean, not to stereotype or generalize, but the pictures I saw, I mean, these are older people. These are people who can volunteer their time to run a caucus in, their neighborhood or whatever. Are they comfortable enough with their phone to even can they use Facebook properly, let alone run and manage this app? I mean, there's a basic failure, even if you accept, the techno-utopian view that, everything's going to be digitized and that's the way of the future. Even if you accept that, this was botched on very basic sort of conceptual levels.
Right.
And if you want to say anything about that, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll just keep complaining about this.
What's the corruption story that you see?
Well, why was this contract even given? I mean, forget about who is on the board of Acronym, the investor company. They distanced themselves from Shadow, but Shadow is, was picked for this because Acronym invested in it. Acronym is this, weird nonprofit. It's got David Plouffe, among others, on the board. I mean, anybody who wants to advance through the ranks of democratic politics is going to want to kiss up to David Plouffe. Let's be honest. It doesn't matter what he knew about this or not. And no, I don't believe him, because he went and worked for Uber, one of the most dishonest startup companies in existence. So that aside, what is Acronym? Okay, Acronym was founded by this woman, Tara McGowan, who is a former journalist. Now, let me say, Tara McGowan is, by all accounts, a very, ambitious, successful go-getter. But everybody says she was a former journalist. It's well, okay, where did she start her career? I mean, I know how I started my career. I worked for a bunch of crappy newspapers in the middle of nowhere until I finally could sell articles. I worked my way up like a lot of people do, unless you know the right people. She started her journalism career covering a presidential campaign for 60 minutes. Nobody does that.
So she must have caught some people's attention with her exceptional work in journalism school.
It doesn't matter how talented you are. That just doesn't happen.
Right, of course.
So,
of course.
I don't know, I don't know. I just wonder who her family knows. Her husband is, married to this strategist for the Buttigieg campaign. And a lot of people, what's the corruption? A lot of people talk about conspiracy theories, people made leaps when they heard that kind of information about this company.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They rigged
it's not
it.
strategic to make leaps. Yes.
Oh, look, as an investigative reporter, I'm often accused of being a conspiracy theorist because, part of the method is to be like, what's the worst case scenario here? Like what,
right.
What's the worst possible motive that somebody in this position could have? And, what would they do in that? Like, that's just how you have to think. I'm sorry. People often think it seems very conspiratorial, mean-spirited, or just cynical, but it's never done me wrong. I'll put it that way. Anyway, so people made the leap that because there are these sort of nepotistic-looking connections to different campaigns, none of which were Sanders' campaign, that this was some kind of inside Democratic Party hacking op or something. There's no evidence for that yet, but I understand why people are asking the question. However, I don't think it's that surprising that a company that is pitching itself as a solution for, mainly Democrats who are concerned about computer security and digital modernization and kissing up to David Plouffe and whatever else would be, affiliated with, socialized with other Democrats. Like, I just don't think that's very indicative.
Social network.
It's networking. And what are we talking about when we talk about that kind of networking? I mean, we're talking about corruption, are we not? I mean, why was this project, again, who put this out to bid? Like, was it put out to bid? How did this happen? How are the companies, if there were bids, like, how are they informed about the opportunity to even apply for this?
I want to play
but even
this
more
clip.
fundamentally, who decided that it has to be an app to begin with? Like, why is this a priority? Because there's money to spend. The consultants need projects to hire their friends to do. Like, that's it.
I want to play this clip of David Plouffe on MSNBC on Tuesday night with Chris Hayes, and it's a broken clip.
I'll be ready.
All right, I'll be ready in a second. But Corey, I want you specifically because this is, first of all, I mean, it's hilarious because people jumped on the volunteer aspect of this, and I could see because technically Acronym is a nonprofit, but this is, I mean, it's just, this is a great example of obfuscation. And frankly, this bit of gentle prodding, I mean, this is the most you're ever going to see on MSNBC, right? And David Plouffe, in addition to, I believe now I don't think he's at Uber or Facebook anymore. I think he's at AKM, which is, big Democratic consultancy where he handles all sorts of clients, I'm sure, including still plenty of Silicon Valley and probably various other corporate interest ones. He's also a fixture at MSNBC, and frankly, one of the few Democrats it's like MSNBC is like, fine, we can have a Democrat as long as it's an Uber Democrat. But here is Chris Hayes, and this is very gentle. Check out David Plouffe's response.
There's been some reporting about the app at the center of this, which appears to have been developed by a company called Shoutout that is associated with another firm called Acronym. David Plouffe, I know you've worked with Acronym. I've seen some reporting in Huffington Post, and Lee Fong and others have sort of walked through the connections. I just want to ask you if you've had anything to do with this app, if you know about it, if you have any insight into this.
I didn't know about it, so I'm helping Acronym. I'm a volunteer on their board. And
what is Acronym?
So Acronym is a digital firm that works on digital advertising, puts out a newsletter every week about what's happening in the presidential race. My understanding is, I just texted the CEO, is Acronym's an investor in Shoutout. I guess Shoutou's got its own board of directors. So in my relationship with Acronym, which has been going on for a few months, I have no knowledge of Shoutout.
So you weren't sitting up there the whole time being like, I actually developed this app. Okay.
I didn't know if it was Microsoft or who it was. Not to throw them under the bus, but
That's my favorite part. Whoa. Not to defend a potential antitrust PR campaign client. Corey, what do you make of that?
I think that was, you were right to preface that as kid gloves. I mean,
yes.
I would have a lot more questions for David about that. I mean, first of all, why are you trying to downplay your association with this operation? Is it because this is a massive embarrassment? Can we start there? This is a massive embarrassment. And not only that, I mean, please, can we get the UN involved here or something? Like, who can trust the Iowa Democrats as of 40 minutes ago, or right when you were going on air, are still putting out final corrected quality controlled results that people are finding errors in. I mean, this is unacceptable. So back to you, David. What do you have to say about that? Chris was really nice to his guests. I mean, that's a good reason to go on a show.
Well, yeah, and I think that,
that's
again,
also why I'll never have that job.
Right.
Like,
I mean, this is the structural constraints. This is actually a good example where I'm not interested in criticizing anybody's personal motives or anything. Like I think Chris is doing his best, right? And part of the problem is that there's limits on what that can be in that context. And maybe some people would deny that, but I'm sorry, that's what I see. I don't think.
Well, it's a reality of how the media works. I mean, but I didn't do this to talk bad about Chris. I mean, it's good that he even asked. The question. I mean, at least now David Pluff's on the record about that, and I don't know that anybody else was going to take the opportunity.
I don't think anybody else has asked him about it.
I'm sure no one else is asking about it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So credit to him for asking. However, there are a lot more questions to be answered here, and people need to step up now that Chris has shown that it can be done. His peers at his level, with access, need to be asking more questions about this. And beginning with what I said, but also, I mean, volunteer. So you're a volunteer board member for a nonprofit that is trying to modernize and digitize and do something at a strategic level for the Democratic Party. What do you get out of this? What's in it for you? I mean, that's a question, right? I would like to. I don't know what's in it for David Plouffe. I mean, presumably, this portfolio of political technology companies they were assembling has some objective to it. I mean, there must be some investment strategy, some reason they're investing in Shadow and not some other app built by people that apparently have no idea what they're doing. I mean, that's where I would begin a line of inquiry with David Plouffe and anybody else associated with this operation. I think that this episode, as much as people are worried that it is going to blunt Bernie Sanders' momentum, is good for him and Elizabeth Warren, for that matter, because they were the two candidates talking about corruption. And this is to the extent to which they can capitalize on this depends on their willingness to describe this as a sign of corruption in the Democratic Party.
I do think, I actually made that point on the Hill that I thought this was a walking demonstration of what Bernie Sanders is talking about. I mean, of course I can't, I'm going to go Bernie, and I think the Warren description of corruption is frankly just so limited that it would go to the, well, maybe there should be better rules and procedures for how we do this, but we're still going to do this. And I think,
well, she doesn't link her corruption policies or whatever her stance to capitalism in any way.
And that's really the key word, in any way, because look, Bernie Sanders is not going to run across the country and say, I'm a Maoist, what some people seem to want online. But I do think. Yeah, I get that there's some fantasy stuff going on, but I do think that the reality is that what actually resonates with people, terminology aside, is, look, it's not that complicated. There's a fundamental rot here. You see it in every major institution in this society, and I've got a critique of it that is like a blunt instrument. It's not gee golly, there's a problem with lobbying, so here's what we're going to do. Lobbyists are going to register on an app, that's the Warren thing. And I just, again, partially, I haven't had time for it to begin with, but especially now, I'll just say again, I think anybody of good faith, including people who are, much more to the right, and maybe more, kind of cautious in policy portfolio, who are drawn to Warren, if you still have a sense, though, that this stuff is really unacceptable and you really want to actually do something about it. And for that matter, certainly if you're in the sort of, Gabbard or Yang contingent, you just have this sort of outsider viewpoint. Look, there's one person in the game right now who can reflect that out, and that's the Sanders campaign. That's it. Warren, I doubt is going.
I agree with that. I think that
Yeah.
Warren can benefit from this in the same way that Sanders can, if they, not saying that either of them should dwell on it, but they did not benefit from this. Right. The only candidate who seemed to benefit from this whole fiasco is Pete Buttigieg.
Well, clearly. And Buttigieg is just a pure manifestation of all of this stuff. And the thing I will just say about Buttigieg, and part of the reason that people like us are so specifically disturbed about him on any number of levels, but There is a nexus, and I want you to just touch on this with Buttigieg just in the last couple of minutes, but I think it's important noting with him. And I think, look, I think the Pete CIA stuff is hilarious and it's funny and it offends people. Whatever, grow up, cry, I don't care. But here's the substantive point. This is a guy who, first of all, there are a lot of, I don't know, vacationing in Swaziland. I would love to go to Swaziland. I don't know. It's okay. There's a lot of interesting. There's naval intelligence. There are a lot of actually interesting things that people should know about his biography. But what we know on the record is McKinsey, deep relationship with Silicon Valley, like to the point of like a friendship to the extent that's humanly possible for either of them with Mark Zuckerberg, and this connection with the military and intelligence. One of the most dangerous dynamics we have in the world today, and of course it's embodied by Trump and Thiel, but it is a bipartisan project, is the profound connection between Silicon Valley and the military industrial complex, the intelligence industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, and the hybrids in that area. And I don't think people really understand the extent to which Silicon Valley is powered by a relationship to U.S. empire and military. And in Pete Buttigieg, as an individual and as a biography, that would be a personification of that nexus, the likes of which we've never seen before.
I'm glad you brought up Pete, because I published an essay with the Baffler this week about Pete. It's called Class Carpetbagger. You can find it at the Baffler if you go and search for that. Or just look at my Twitter account. I think it's pinned there. Anyway, I really loathe Pete for all the reasons you named and more. I also said before the Iowa caucus as a joke that if he wins, then he's definitely CIA.
Pete Guaido.
And what happened?
It's kind of like those witch tests. Like if they sink, they're not a witch, but if they float, they are a witch. That's the CIA. If he wins the CIA.
I love it, but I just want to say really quickly, what other? I think even at this point in the campaign, that the Biden campaign could not get the Des Moines Register and the CNN to just drop a poll. Like people need really. First of all, never would that happen for Bernie, obviously. So there's institutional bias. But I don't even necessarily think that. Yeah, don't release the poll. Someone didn't ask about me. Not only would they not do it, they'd run a story about it and say that his campaign was sexist when they asked it.
Trying to sabotage.
Yeah, they're trying to sabotage the vote.
I attribute that to class privilege. And I don't think there's any way we can know if Pete worked for the CIA, not without, I invite any editor to give me a starting expenses budget of $10,000
pray to God,
and a fee to match, and I will do my best to figure out if Pete works for the CIA. I don't think we're going to find out in 2020. To me, the more important question is, is he the kind of person that thinks it would be really cool to work for the CIA? Yes, definitely.
Yes,
definitely.
Absolutely.
And in my essay, one of the things I brought up was his undergraduate thesis on Graham Greene's The Quiet American, which is a nice little novel. And there was a movie made with Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser that was okay, if I remember.
It's a good movie.
The plot of The Quiet American involves a naive, and the title character is a naive young CIA officer in Vietnam at a time when it's the war of the French in their last desperate bid to hold on to colonies in Southeast Asia. And the CIA guy in the story is he's an idiot. I mean, he's best and brightest, went to all the right schools. He knows nothing. He's completely naive and overconfident. Has the wrong solution to every problem, goes places he shouldn't, and makes a mess out of everything. And I mean, Pete thought it was just the coolest thing. He did not understand the book at all. And I think that you see that tendency in everything that he does, and his enthusiasm for, technocratic solutions is just an aspect of that. And when it comes to him, canceling the poll or whatever, I mean, I don't know. He is the kind of guy to call in favors. We know that from his resume. However, I don't know if you can call in those kind of favors, or it works in the way that people might imagine. I mean, I think he's really just deploying a lot of class privilege. Right. One of the most gratifying things out of the New York Times endorsement interviews was watching their treatment of Pete. Not just when they asked him about fixing bread prices in Canada, which his explanation for was not credible at all, but in what they ultimately said about him and his meager accomplishments. You know, they really damned him with faint praise and talked about, you know, basically come back when you've done something. So, you know, he is a walking beacon of class privilege. And, you know, at this point, I accept all mundane explanations for how he managed to pull through and proclaim himself the winner. Although it is exactly what, you know, somebody running an insurgency campaign in Venezuela would do.
Precisely. That's exactly it. I mean, he is he literally should be up there. Although I will say, from reading about Juan Guaido, obviously U.S. intelligence asset and connected with the worst forces in Latin America and everything else, and not impressive, but more self-made than Pete. I mean, done something besides test well. I'll give him that. Although I mean, last night I literally could picture Pete on that stage, standing there while Trump in a parallel universe says, "And Pete, we believe in you. You're the president." Well, he nods appreciatively along. Corey Pein, the book is Live, Work, 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 Die, Journey to the Savage Heart of Silicon Valley. It's essential. You got to read it. Read the piece in The Baffler. Follow Corey on social media. Check out News from Nowhere. Check out the AM Quickie. Corey Pein, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, it was fun. Good show.
Thanks, brother. Take care.
Cheers.
All right, folks. Time for Gem.
Yeah, let's do this.
And then after the Gem, I mean, is anything coming in?
Nothing.
Still
concrete.
bullshit.
Yeah.
All right. Gem.
Yeah.
David Griscom.
So I wanted to talk about something that's been ongoing for a little while now, but it looks like it's going to escalate very quickly. And that is in Canada, the government has been pushing for a pipeline, a $6 billion, 670-kilometer pipeline called the Coastal Gaslink pipeline. And that pipeline is going to be going through native lands, and specifically the Wet'suwet'en people's land, which is in British Columbia. Over the past year, there have been a lot of conflict between the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Wet'suwet'en people. And it's starting to look like there's going to be another raid. So just to give you a little bit of the context about what's going on there so that people can get involved and very much pay attention to what's happening. This pipeline is massive. It's been going through lots of different areas. The Wet'suwet'en people in this area actually never formally ceded their land to the Canadian government. It's very much a remote area of the country, and around 22,000 square kilometers in British Columbia was never ceded to the Canadian government. And this was actually found to be correct by a Canadian Supreme Court decision just as recently as 1997. So this is something that's been established for a long time. And this pipeline went through the area, and these people were never consulted whether or not this pipeline should be allowed to go through their land. Now, we've seen this has been a constant theme throughout the United States and Canada in recent years, where they're trying to push these pipelines through native and indigenous people's lands without consulting them. And if they are consulting them, they're consulting some groups and not others, groups that they think that they're going to be able to get a favorable decision from. So, despite the protests from the Wet'suwet'en people initially, the Canadian government and this company have been pushing forward with the pipeline. All the way back to last year, protesters have shut down the main road in their territory. And as I said, it's a very remote area, so there's not that many roads going through it. They actually shut it down, said this is our territory, and they created blockades to prevent workers from being able to come and build this pipeline. Now, over the past year, there has been some negotiations that opened it up for them to lay out the kind of prefab work for it. But now they've shut it down again. So last year, the RCMP raided the tribe's lands, and in a very frightening and alarming document that The Guardian was able to dig up recently, it was found that the RCMP had been authorized to use lethal force against the native peoples there. And if you know anything about the history of the settler colonial states like the United States and the Canadian government, the last thing you need to be doing is giving the police the right to be able to use lethal force against Native people. So in December, this started to heat up again, with the Canadian government basically saying that they have already established whatever legal, the Wet'suwet'en people have already gone through whatever legal mechanism that they have to stop this pipeline from going through, and that they're going to push through anyway.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, the Wet'suwet'en people, obviously, and the hereditary chiefs deny this. So the Coastal Gaslink pipeline, the police came through and gave a notice to the people living there that this is going through. Well, the hereditary chiefs and the Wet'suwet'en people living on this land actually gave an eviction notice to Coastal Gaslink recently. Nice. And so now, just a quick timeline for where we're at, in December 31st, the Canadian judge said that the Wet'suwet'en people have to let pipeline workers into their land. January 5th, the hereditary chiefs provided an eviction notice to the Coastal Gasline pipeline workers. And January 6th, there were felled trees that were along the road. So this is, the blockade system to prevent access for the workers into the area. And, throughout the end of January, the Wet'suwet'en people say that the Canadian government directly needs to negotiate with them. And for people who aren't familiar with this is something that's very important when it comes to like tribal sovereignty in the United States and in Canada, which is that when you negotiate here, you need to be negotiating nation to nation. So the Wet'suwet'en people don't need to be negotiating directly with some corporation. They are a sovereign nation, and within their own land that they should be treated as such. The Canadian government took a very long time to come around to that. And then at the end of the month, they had meetings between the company and the Canadian government and their representatives. So just the other day, it was announced that those meetings and the halt on the movement and the halt on the blockade would be lifted because these meetings were not successful. The hereditary chiefs say it was because Coastal Gaslink has no interest in honoring any of the demands that they've put forward. So in the past 24 hours, copters have been spotted throughout the area, and around 200 to 300 officers have been seen, surrounding it. So it's looking very likely that there's going to be a raid. It should be noted that former vice chair of the UN Committee to End Discrimination and Racism just came out and said that these pipelines need to be halted. And just realize the ridiculous nature of these demands from, one, the Canadian government, and two, from this corporation. So one of the big things fundamentally when we're talking about these gas pipelines is the damage to the ecosystem and specifically to the water supply. And if we know anything about what's happened in the United States over the past couple of years, these pipelines tend to leak. And when they do leak, they can destroy massive amounts of water. And in areas like this that have a very, very clean and, great natural resources of clean water, this is something that's very frightening. Well, the corporation, Coastal Gaslink, was trying to calm everybody by saying, well, if we ruin all of your rivers and all of your water, we promise to provide you with potable water in the short term. So, you could see how this is just a bad deal for people who aren't getting any kind of economic benefit from this. You're seeing people who live on land that's unceded to the Canadian government, and people who've been able to live. Don't get me wrong, there's always kind of colonial infringement on the rights, but have been able to live in their area because it was never of very much interest to the settlers and the Canadian government. As we see in the United States and in Canada, whenever there's an economic opportunity on these lands, then these treaty rights, these agreements, these start to get lost. So, one, we need to be paying attention to what's going on there, absolute solidarity with the folks and the Wet'suwet'en people. Two, as leftists, we really need to be pushing as much as possible to make sure that when we're talking about, the kind of change that we want to see in the future, respecting the sovereignty of First Nations people, Native Americans, American Indians is first and foremost to any kind of just society. And three, that we are no longer going to allow the U.S. government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, the New Zealand governments around the world from being able to abuse Native peoples, especially in ways where the long-term consequences, the environmental consequence, is something that's irreversible.
Absolutely. And we'll keep following that as best we can, and hopefully pointing people and resources. I just want to take this opportunity to really say quickly, happy birthday to Joshua Kahn Russell, our dear friend who's a great presence on the show. We'll be doing more with him soon. And he's also the executive director of the Wildfire Project, which if you haven't checked out yet, you should definitely check out their website. Give them some support if you can. They do really amazing ground level work. And I know that a major issue for Joshua is First Nations peoples and ecology, anti-colonialism, anti-primitive accumulation, but also conversely in a grounded and, real way, looking at all of the things that we actually really have to learn and absorb from a broader set of communities in our world. So I wanted to note that as well, and we will continue to follow that.
Thinking about things like this make me think like the post-colonial is a misnomer, right? Colonialism is something that's continuing on actively.
I mean, and just to add on that real quick, one thing that's a major issue today is still what is called the doctrine of discovery, and that's something that's used in the Canadian legal system and the American legal system. That is a doctrine that came from the Pope in 1493. Right, that said that all these newly discovered lands belong to the Christian nation, the Christian kingdom, and as recently as in
they have not been discovered yet.
I mean, it's funny, but it's like
they're not the Christians, so they don't know where they are.
That we're sitting here in actual I
discover your home and your wife
system, and they're citing the Catholic Church's doctrines from 500 years ago.
But did Justin Trudeau wear Chewbacca socks when he cited
Don't get me started on Justin Trudeau and how much of a punk that kid is.
That's some rivulet.
Something I really like from the Pope is the idea that these people don't even live what they live because they don't know where they live, which when you think about it is really pro-structuralist. Anyways, we're losing live ammo and we're going to get that oil. And if you'll notice, there's a large contingent of women police officers who are involved in wiping out these people and their homes. Totally disgusting. Is there anything else? Anything from Iowa? No. All right, so maybe we'll look at it in the postgame. Guys, I want to just do a little palate cleanser for you. Normally, we would do this in the postgame, but I just want to share a little love, a little joy, a little enjoyment. Someone brought this to my attention earlier today, and this is genuinely one of the funniest things that I've seen in quite some time. And I say that a lot, and honestly, a lot of it is also disgusting and sad, but we come across a fair amount of funny content.
The thing about this is that it sustains and sort of elevates as the time goes on. Like I had to literally pace around the office when I first watched this because it was so funny. And that was like the first minute of it, but
so funny. So I don't know when this is from.
It's recently.
It's recent, and it has to be on a live stream. Is this from a day ago?
This is from 19 hours ago.
19 hours ago. Apparently this is a live stream, so this isn't edited out. And it seems to me that there was an agreement beforehand that like, hey, if I get this phone call, I got to take it. But the way that this phone call is taken and the duration and it's not even contempt, because contempt is more energy. It's just pure disrespect.
Pure alpha.
Pure alpha. So the way I'll intro this is I'm going to try to get Larry King on TMBS. All props to Larry King. Dave Rubin is having a super rough time of it seems like. And when we cut this for YouTube later, it will be, what will it be? It will be like, Alpha Larry King, Cucks Beta Dave Rubin. Guys, watch this. And if you're listening, just realize that Larry King is speaking into a 1996 style massive flip phone. Put this on the speaker so our guests can hear this and enjoy.
But that gets to what you were saying about this sort of partisan way of just, you pick your side and that's sort of where we're at. And these guys aren't going to dinner with each other anymore or any of these things.
You don't need Republican moderates. I grew up with a lot of them.
Yeah.
New York Herald Tribune. There's some great youth. Scott of Pennsylvania. Jake Javits of New York.
Yeah. He's a distant cousin of mine, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Jacob Javits, yeah.
Great man.
Yeah?
Great man.
Oh, he's got a phone.
Now let me show you.
Yeah, show us this phone. This old...
is Samsung makes it. I visited that company in Korea.
Yeah. And it's ringing right now.
It is. Oh, shit. Hello? Hey, Cannon, where are you?
Look at Dave's already upset, seething inside.
Oh, you didn't have a game today.
We had 2. Dad, I had to get up at 6 a.m. Our game was in Toronto.
I got a list. You got a doubleheader this coming Saturday. How did you do?
Rewind that. Rewind that. Sorry, I laughed over it. It's too good.
You can hear Dave like whispering to Larry.
Whispering.
We had 2. Dad, I had to get up at 6 a.m. Our game was in Toronto. Halfway to Vegas.
I got a list. You got a doubleheader this coming Saturday.
Yeah, we had a doubleheader today, too.
How did you do?
Larry.
We lost the first one and we won the second.
Oh, that's great.
In both games total, I went 2 for 6 in 7 at-bats with 8 singles and a walk and 2 RBIs.
That's a 333 batting average, Cannon. Well, I'm doing David Rubin's podcast now. I'm on his show, and while talking to you, the audience is watching me talk to you. Oh, wow. Cannon, you're a star. So you could do 10 minutes when you open the refrigerator.
I would love to do my own podcast.
He wants to do his own podcast.
I'll bring him in.
He's going to be 20 years old. I'll bring him here. He's a great kid. All right, Cannon, when am I going to see you? Tonight I'm tied up. Tomorrow I got to do that. How about Thursday? How about Friday night? All right. The night before your doubleheader. I'll be at both games.
All right. They're both going to be 7 innings, not 9.
Okay, I'll be there.
Pause it. I just have to say, now you think after it's sweet. I think he's talking to his son. He's been enormously rude, and it sounds like his son actually is trying to wrap the call up.
Yes.
So let's see where this goes now, because you think
you can sense Dave's sense of relief coming.
You can sense Dave. What I also love, and my guess is that Dave is the type of guy who stupidly grins, but is like seething inside. Yeah. It's like, I'm getting disrespected in my own set. Check this out.
Thursday. How about Friday night?
Sounds good.
All right.
I am dressed home now.
The night before your doubleheader.
Are you going to go?
I'll be at both games.
All right. They're both going to be 7 innings, not 9.
Okay, I'll be there. I love you, Cannon.
Aw.
Did you hear the news? I love you.
Okay, talk to you tomorrow. What?
Dad, did you hear the news?
What?
They're the Dodgers or no?
No, what?
The Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price.
Today? That's great. The Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price today.
You're breaking news for me, man.
He's so mad.
That's tremendous. Mad. Who did they?
Look at his face here.
Today? That's great. The Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price today.
You're breaking news for me, man.
That wasn't a real sip of water.
And David today? That's great. The Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price today.
You're breaking news for me, man.
That's tremendous. Who did they give up for them?
Nikes and suspenders, pure disrespect.
Oh, that's two pretty good players. Get to my Anakin picture. Alex Verdugo is going to be a star. So Peterson, is there someone go from the Angels to the Red Sox?
We got a rookie. He was a rookie last year. Dominican guy.
Wow. Cannon, you bring me great
Dave
news.
just gave him a sign here. Watch this. Fake sip. Let's go.
Yeah, let's
wow.
go. Come on, Larry.
Cannon, you bring me great news. That's great, Cannon. Thank you for this, and the audience here thanks you.
Better than what we were talking about.
He says, tell him anytime. Okay, Cannon, baby, I love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye. Well, folks, the Dodgers got Mookie Betts and David Price, and Jock Peterson went to the Angels three-way trade.
See, you are a newsman. Breaking news.
Oh, that's so awesome! That's so fucking awesome!
Couldn't happen.
You know what? I mean, look, to be fair, he's literally explain. You know, he said, like, there used to be, I guess this dumb kid is asking me about the Republicans again. Okay, you know, there used to be Republicans that were moderate. There was Jacob Javits. I don't know, this fucking moron kid who thinks I'm his mentor. Hello, son. Would you like to have a random conversation on my Samsung flip phone? I actually visited the facility in 1997. Oh my God. I can barely even add. The only thing I can add to that is what I perceive to be is the deep psychodynamics at display there from Dave. Just like, I thought that he was my mentor.
What's also funny is
it's okay, I'm being clever. You know, thank God I did stand-up comedy. I know how to roll with this.
You look like you look at the runtime of these episodes, and so this one has 47 minutes, and so that was 3 minutes of that 47. The other ones are way longer. He usually goes way longer with guests. So Larry King gave him less time than typical.
Larry
and
King
talked to his son about
Larry
Mookie Betts.
King is an alpha. He's a legend. CNN are
2 hours with Glenn Beck.
2 hours with Glenn Beck. You have about 45 minutes, and if my son calls about baseball, I'm picking up the phone. All right, man. Let me guess. The Democrats are out of control.
But it was actually
a lot of people are saying mean things to you online, I understand.
Dave should actually feel lucky that that phone call came when it did, because the way Larry King said, I don't know any moderate Republicans, do you? He saved Ruben from actually having to answer that question, which is contrary to everything Ruben's been talking about.
Yeah, but Dave is too much of an idiot to recognize that Larry King's son with the cool baseball stats saved him from making, I mean, I won't say making an ass of himself. He is an ass, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. that two 7-inning games, I wonder if that kid was in minor league baseball, actually.
It sounds like minor league.
Yeah.
That's great. Kid, and at one point he literally said, he tells this kid, you're a star, you can get 10 minutes out of opening the fridge, and implicit, like, unlike this guy that I'm literally taking a phone call to talk about baseball trades with, he's sitting there in complete boredom, just like, yeah, well, you know, there was Jacob Javits, and there was moderates, and there was, Jesus Christ, he's a nice kid, but he's not the brightest. And all of a sudden, wait, the Angels got Hernandez. We are definitely at the phase where Dave Rubin is amazing for not the reasons he thinks he's amazing.
Yeah. Couldn't happen to a nicer host.
He finally became a success through embracing being, you know, just this like embarrassing pseudo intellectual, you know, right-wing asshole, mind-blowingly stupid nonsense. He finally got a little bit of a career going. And now, at this point, through sheer repetition and utter inability to form thought and interacting with Larry King, he's legit entertaining. Mm-hmm. That Dave Rubin segment is the most entertaining piece of YouTube that I've seen in at least a year. And probably the most entertaining ever since he and Joe Rogan talked about the post office.
No, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when Alex Jones was at that bar and that kid showed up.
Ooh,
like, I think this is the closest I've felt to that level of, like, I can't believe this is actually happening.
Except, to give that kid credit, he had enough energy to make Alex Jones panic. There's a crazy guy at the bar. I got to get out of here. Yeah. Larry King's just like, oh, no, just some boring dope asking me about Jacob Javits. I guess he tries to make Star Wars jokes on Twitter and people don't think they're funny. Anyways, it's a doubleheader on Saturday.
Go to Dr. Glenn Beck's assistant.
This kid tracked down my email address and came over and asked me about college campuses or something. And the funniest line he had was that he said he was a stand-up comedian. But anyways, Cameron, I heard that guy has a knuckleball. Is that going to be a problem?
Is he the one that had Tommy John?
I love that he starts talking about his Samsung tour too.
He starts talking about his Samsung.
That's
tour.
what's known as a bored interview guest.
Yeah, that is.
So you think everyone's partisan and that's what it's going to be from now on?
Everybody just seems to be in their own tribes. Yeah, exactly, kid. Anyways, speaking of tribes, I visited the Samsung tribe. 1997.
Oh, whoops, look a call.
Did that call. I told my son to call me at the 40-minute mark so I could shave 3 minutes off of this unimaginably boring interview.
I told my assistant to wait until my son actually called to get me out of this stupid thing. I gave my phone before he actually called.
Yeah, but anyways, no hard feelings. In conclusion, people shouldn't make fun of you on Twitter, and things sure are partisan. Okay. It's like the 9% of Larry King that's even paying attention is just sort of like, if I cared, I would ask you why you host Nazis if you're so concerned about partisanship, but I don't care. Keep being you, man. Keep being you, Dave, please. All right, folks. Become a patron today. It's very important. The goal at the end of this month is to be at 3,600 at least. We want to clear 4,000 patrons in early April. Grab your tickets to the North Door in Austin, Texas, April 3rd. Check out tmbs.fm for all other info. Check the Bell House. See if there's still tickets left for Friday. It's going to be a really fun show. See you in the postgame.